My son never knew that I make $15,000 a week. The hardest part is that he treated me like I was broke. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning, I wake up in my modest Queens apartment, the same one I've lived in for over 32 years. The scent of lukewarm coffee curls in the air. The hum of the city sneaks in through the cracked window that I keep meaning to fix but never do. I shuffle from room to room, my joints aching after decades of hard work, my mind heavy with thoughts I can't share with anyone. The walls are lined with faded family photos, pictures of birthdays, graduations, moments that once felt so precious. Now they feel like ghosts watching me, reminding me of what I thought we had. Last week, when I found an unopened text message from my son David, ignored for 3 whole days, I felt something hard snap inside my chest. I had expected a simple, "Love you, Mom," or even just, "Sorry I missed Sunday dinner again." But nothing. Just the cold glow of my phone screen and the crushing weight of silence. That silence has become the soundtrack of my life, and I'm tired of dancing to its lonely rhythm. You see, what David doesn't know, what nobody in my family knows, is that I've been quietly building wealth for the past 15 years. Not from lottery tickets or inheritance, from careful investments in the stock market, from buying cryptocurrency when everyone thought I was too old to understand technology, from purchasing rental properties in neighborhoods that others overlooked. I make $15,000 every single week from my investments alone. My net worth has grown into millions. But I still live in the same small apartment, still wear the same modest clothes, still clip coupons at the grocery store. Why? Because I wanted to see who would love me for me, not for my money. And the test results have been devastating. I raised David as a single mother after his father walked out when David was only 7 years old. Michael left us with nothing but debts and a broken promise that he'd send money for his son. He never did. I worked 2 jobs for years, cleaning office buildings in Manhattan during the day, the smell of industrial disinfectant burning my nostrils, my knees screaming as I scrubbed floors on my hands and knees. At night, I managed inventory at a small electronics store in Astoria, counting circuit boards and cables until my eyes blurred. Every penny I earned went to David. New sneakers when his got too small, school supplies, birthday parties with his friends. I wanted him to feel normal, loved, provided for. When he was 12 and wanted a bicycle, not just any bicycle, but the red mountain bike in the window of the shop on Northern Boulevard, I worked double shifts for 2 months. I remember the joy in his eyes when I surprised him with it on his birthday. That smile made every aching muscle worth it. "Mom, you're the best," he said, throwing his arms around me. "I love you so much." I held on to those words for years. As David grew older, the requests changed but never stopped. "Mom, can you help me with rent this month?" "Mom, my car needs repairs." "Mom, Sarah and I want to take a vacation. Can you lend us some money?" The word lend always stung because we both knew it was never really a loan. I kept a mental ledger of every dollar I gave him. $23,000 for his college tuition that his scholarships didn't cover, $8,000 for his wedding, $15,000 for the down payment on his first apartment, countless smaller amounts for emergencies that seemed to happen every other month. But I paid because I loved him, because he was my son, because single mothers like me, we learned to show love through sacrifice. One evening last winter, I was washing dishes in my kitchen, the same chipped ceramic plates I've had for 20 years, when I heard David on the phone in the living room. He was talking to his friend Jake, laughing about something. "Dude, Mom always pays," David said, his voice carrying that casual confidence I'd heard so many times before. "She'll never say no. I just have to ask the right way, you know? Make her feel needed." The plate slipped from my hands and shattered against the sink, but the sound of breaking ceramic was nothing compared to the sound of my heart cracking. Make her feel needed. Those words echoed in the empty kitchen long after David hung up the phone. All those years, all those sacrifices, had they just been transactions to him? Was I just an ATM wrapped in maternal love? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of the subway and the occasional siren wailing through the Queens streets. I started remembering other conversations, other moments that suddenly felt different under this new, harsh light. The way David's voice changed when he called me, warmer when he needed something, cooler when he didn't. The way he always seemed to have urgent problems right after I'd mentioned having a good month at work. Back when I used to tell him about my little victories, I began to notice things I'd trained myself not to see. How he never asked about my health, my dreams, my fears. How he never visited just to visit. How every phone call began with small talk but always ended with a request. How he never remembered my birthday unless I mentioned it first, but he could recall exactly when his rent was due. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the growing realization that somewhere along the way, I'd taught my son that my love was conditional on my usefulness. By always saying yes, by always providing, by never setting boundaries, I'd turned myself into a resource instead of a person. Meanwhile, my investment portfolio was growing beyond my wildest dreams. I'd started small 15 years ago, putting aside $20 here and there from my cleaning jobs. I read books about investing, watched YouTube videos, took online courses. I learned about compound interest, about diversification, about the power of patience. I bought my first shares of Apple stock when everyone said I was crazy. I purchased Bitcoin when people told me it was a scam. I invested in real estate in neighborhoods everyone else was abandoning. And it worked. God, it worked better than I ever imagined. My weekly dividends alone now exceed what most people make in a month. My cryptocurrency holdings have multiplied tenfold. My rental properties generate steady passive income. I have enough money to buy a mansion in the Hamptons, to travel the world first class, to shower my family with luxury. But I kept living small, kept hiding my wealth because I wanted to know who would love Mary Chen the person, not Mary Chen the bank account. The answer was becoming painfully clear. My 63rd birthday arrived on a rainy Tuesday in March. I woke up alone, as usual, and made myself a cup of coffee. I waited all morning for a phone call, a text, even a Facebook message. Nothing. By afternoon, I felt pathetic for hoping. By evening, I was angry, not just sad, but genuinely angry for the first time in years. At 9:30 that night, David finally called. "Hey, Mom, how's it going?" "It's my birthday, David." A pause. "Oh shit, Mom, I'm sorry. Sarah and I have been so busy with work and busy." The word tasted bitter. "Of course. Look, I'll make it up to you. Maybe we can do dinner this weekend?" "Actually, speaking of which, I hate to ask, but we're a little tight this month. Could you spot us $1,500 for rent? I'll pay you back, I promise." I stared at the phone, feeling something fundamental shift inside my chest. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered. "What?" "Nothing, David, I need to go." I hung up before he could respond. That night, I took out a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, though I couldn't remember what occasion I'd been waiting for, and I drank it alone while looking through old photo albums. Pictures of David as a baby, as a toddler, as a young man. In every photo, I was smiling, but as I looked at my face through the years, I could see something dying behind my eyes, the bright hope of young motherhood slowly dimming into resigned acceptance. When did I stop expecting joy? When did I settle for being tolerated instead of cherished? Spring arrived, and with it came a series of incidents that felt like the universe testing my resolve. David's old car broke down, and naturally, he called me for money to fix it. Sarah lost her part-time job and needed help with her student loans. There was always something, always an emergency, always an extended hand and an expectation that Mom would come through. But I was changing. Those phone conversations David overheard had planted a seed of awareness that was growing in the soil of my resentment. I started paying attention to how I felt after our interactions. Drained, used, forgotten, until the next crisis arose. I also started paying attention to other relationships in my life. My neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, who brought me homemade tamales just because she thought I might like them. My friend Linda from the community center, who called to check on me when I missed our weekly Zumba class because of a cold. The young man at the corner bodega who always asked about my day and seemed genuinely interested in my answer. These people expected nothing from me. They liked me for my stories, my laugh, my opinions about the weather. They saw me as a whole person, not just as someone who could solve their problems with cash. The contrast was painful and illuminating. One Saturday afternoon in May, I was supposed to have dinner with David and Sarah. We'd planned it for weeks. Or rather, I'd planned it, and they'd agreed to show up. I spent the morning grocery shopping, bought ingredients for David's favorite meal, the one I used to make him as a child when he was sick or sad, beef stew with carrots and potatoes, the way my own mother had made it for me. I cleaned my apartment, set the table with my good dishes, the ones I usually saved for holidays that rarely came. I even bought flowers for the centerpiece, yellow daisies that reminded me of sunshine. By 4 o'clock, everything was ready. The stew was simmering, filling my small apartment with rich, comforting smells. I'd changed into my nicest blouse. The blue one David once said brought out my eyes. At 4:30, my phone buzzed. A text message. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, something came up with Sarah's family. Can we rain check?" Something came up. Just like that. Weeks of planning, hours of preparation, reduced to a casual text message and a request to reschedule. No phone call, no explanation of what emergency could be more important than the mother who'd spent her last $20 on groceries for this meal. No acknowledgement that I might have feelings about being canceled on at the last minute. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the smells of a dinner that would now feed only me, and something broke. Not cracked or strained. Broke completely. Like a dam bursting after holding back too much pressure for too long. I turned off the stove. I put the flowers in the trash. I changed back into my old clothes. And then I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd trained myself to shed, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest, where I'd been storing years of disappointment. Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't my love enough? Why was I always the one making the effort, the one being understanding, the one accepting scraps of attention when I deserved a feast of care? That night, alone again, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop helping David financially. Not forever, maybe, but long enough to see if our relationship could survive without money as its foundation. Long enough to discover if my son loved his mother or just her bank account. The next morning, I felt different. Lighter somehow, but also terrified. I'd spent so many years defining myself as David's helper, his safety net, his solution to every problem. Who would I be if I stopped playing that role? Would there be anything left between us? I didn't have to wait long to find out. 3 days later, David called with another emergency. Sarah's student loan payment had increased, and they were short $500. His voice had that familiar tone. Casual confidence mixed with just enough stress to make me feel guilty if I said no. I know it's a lot to ask, Mom, but no. The word came out cleaner than I expected. Firm, final. What? I said no, David. I can't help you this time. A pause. I could practically hear him recalibrating, switching to a different strategy. Mom, are you okay? This isn't like you. This isn't like you. As if being generous was my entire personality. As if having boundaries was a symptom of illness. I'm fine. I just can't keep being your emergency fund. Emergency fund? Mom, that's not... Look, this is important. If we don't make this payment, it'll hurt Sarah's credit score. And that's your problem to solve, not mine. Another pause. Longer this time. When David spoke again, his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Seriously? You're really going to leave us hanging like this? I'm not leaving you hanging. I'm expecting you to handle your own responsibilities. Since when do you... He stopped himself, but I could fill in the rest. Since when do I expect anything from you? Since when do I have opinions about how you live your life? Since when am I anything more than a convenient solution to your problems? David, I love you, but I won't keep paying for your choices. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding the phone, my hand trembling. Part of me wanted to call him back, to apologize, to transfer the money and pretend this conversation never happened. It would be so easy to return to our old pattern, to buy peace with my bank account, to purchase his affection with another sacrifice. But I didn't. For the first time in my adult life, I chose my own emotional well-being over someone else's convenience. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. That night, I called my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia who'd been helping me manage my growing wealth for the past 5 years. Patricia was one of the few people who knew the truth about my financial situation, and she'd been encouraging me for months to start enjoying the fruits of my investments. Mary, she said when I explained what had happened, you've been hiding your light under a bushel for too long. Money is a tool, not a weapon, but it's also not a substitute for genuine relationship. I just wanted to know if they loved me for me, and now you know. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? I spent the weekend thinking about Patricia's words. What was I going to do? I could go back to the old way, continue funding David's life while receiving minimal emotional return, or I could forge a new path, scarier, lonelier maybe, but honest. The decision was made for me on Monday morning when Sarah called. Not David, Sarah. Mary, I need to talk to you. Her voice was cold, clipped. David told me about your conversation the other day. Did he? I don't understand what's gotten into you. We've always been able to count on you, and now suddenly you're being selfish. Selfish? The word hit like a slap. After decades of putting my son's needs before my own, I was selfish for saying no once. Sarah, do you know what this means for us? David had to borrow money from his boss, which was humiliating for him. We might have to move in with my parents. Our whole budget is based on knowing you're there when we need help. Our whole budget is based on knowing you're there. Not hoping, not appreciating, knowing. As if my financial support was guaranteed, something they were entitled to rather than something I chose to give. I'm sorry you're having financial difficulties, I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. But your budget shouldn't depend on me. God, Mary, when did you become so cold? Cold. Selfish. These were the words my family used to describe a woman who finally started valuing herself. I felt something click into place then, a clarity I'd never experienced before. I'm not cold, Sarah. I'm just no longer willing to set myself on fire to keep other people warm. She hung up on me too. For the next 2 weeks, my phone stayed quiet. No calls from David, no texts asking how I was doing. The silence was different from before. Not the silence of being forgotten, but the silence of being punished. And strangely, it felt like freedom. I used this time to really examine my life. I walked through my apartment, really looked at it, for the first time in years. The furniture was old but sturdy. The walls needed paint. The bathroom faucet had been dripping for months. I'd been living like someone who was just passing through, never investing in my own comfort, never making this space truly mine. But why? I had more than enough money to make this place beautiful, to make my daily life more pleasant. I'd been so focused on being David's safety net that I'd forgotten to be my own. I started small, new sheets, real Egyptian cotton instead of the scratchy ones I'd been using for 5 years. A coffee maker that didn't require me to bang on the side to get it working. Fresh paint in the kitchen. A warm yellow that reminded me of those daisies I'd thrown away. Each purchase felt revolutionary. I was spending money on myself without guilt, without justification, without checking to see if David needed it more. Just because I wanted my life to be a little more beautiful, a little more comfortable. The young man at the bodega, his name was Miguel, noticed the changes first. Mrs. Chen, you look different. Happy. Do I? Yeah, like lighter. Like you're carrying less. He was right. I was carrying less. Less resentment, less obligation, less fear. The space that used to be filled with anxiety about David's next crisis was now filled with curiosity about my own possibilities. What did I want from the rest of my life? The question felt foreign, almost scandalous. When was the last time I'd asked myself what I wanted, rather than what was expected of me? I wanted to travel. I'd never left New York except for a few trips to visit distant relatives. I wanted to see the ocean, not just from a plane window, but to walk on a beach and feel sand between my toes. I wanted to take a cooking class and learn to make something other than the small rotation of meals I'd been preparing for 30 years. I wanted to read books that had nothing to do with investing or single parenting, books that existed purely for pleasure. Most of all, I wanted to feel valuable as myself, not for what I could provide others. 3 weeks after my conversation with Sarah, David showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was in my kitchen, trying out a new recipe for Thai curry I'd found online, when I heard his key in the lock. He still had a key from his teenage years, and it had never occurred to me to ask for it back. "Mom," he called out. I turned off the burner and walked to the living room. He looked stressed, tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was messy. Part of me, the mother part that would never fully die, wanted to ask if he was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of himself. But I waited for him to speak first. "We need to talk," he said. "Okay." He sat on my old couch without being invited, the same way he'd been doing since he was a child. But something felt different this time. He looked around the apartment, noticing the new paint, the fresh flowers on the table, the general sense of care that had crept into the space. "The place looks good," he said grudgingly. "Thank you. Mom, this thing between us, it's gotten out of hand. Sarah's upset. I'm stressed about money and you're acting like a completely different person. Maybe I am a different person. What does that mean?" I sat down across from him in the chair I'd recently reupholstered in a cheerful blue fabric. "It means I'm tired of being taken for granted, David. I'm tired of our relationship existing only when you need something from me. That's not true. When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you visited without wanting money? When was the last time you asked about my life, my dreams, my feelings?" He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. We both knew the answers. "I didn't realize," he said finally. I mean, you never seemed to mind helping out." I minded a lot. But I wanted to be needed by you, so I convinced myself that being useful was the same as being loved. "Mom, I do love you. Do you? Or do you love what I do for you?" The question hung in the air between us. I could see him struggling with it, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this conversation would be different from the others. Maybe he was finally ready to see me as more than an ATM with— "I don't know how to answer that," he said, and his honesty surprised me. "That's okay. I didn't know how to ask it until recently." We sat in silence for a few minutes. I could smell the curry I'd been cooking, could hear the distant sound of traffic on Northern Boulevard, could feel the weight of 32 years of history between us. Sarah thinks you're going through some kind of midlife crisis, David said eventually. Sarah thinks a lot of things. Most of them about what I owe you. She's just stressed about money. So am I, David. Do you know that? Do you know that every time you call with an emergency, I worry? Do you know that I've been afraid to spend money on myself because what if you needed it more? He looked genuinely surprised. But Mom, you always seem so calm about it. You never act like it's a problem. Because I trained myself not to. Because I thought that's what love looked like. But I was wrong. Another silence. David was fidgeting with his phone, the way he always did when conversations got uncomfortable. I realized this might be the longest we'd talked about feelings in years. What do you want from me? He asked finally. It was such a simple question, but it felt monumental. What did I want from my son? I want you to call me sometimes, just because you're thinking of me. I want you to ask about my day and listen to the answer. I want you to visit me because you enjoy my company, not because you need something. I want you to remember my birthday without being reminded. I want to feel like I matter to you as a person, not just as a resource. And the money thing? The money thing stops now. You and Sarah are adults. If you can't afford your lifestyle, you need to change your lifestyle. I won't be your backup plan anymore. His face hardened. So you're really just going to cut us off? After everything we've been through? Everything we've been through? David, what have we been through together? What struggles have we shared? What joys have we celebrated? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I've been going through things alone while you've been going through my bank account. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were true. We'd been living parallel lives for years. Me supporting, him taking, both of us pretending it was the same as having a real relationship. That's not fair, Mom. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I worked 2 jobs for 15 years to support you, and you never once asked if I was tired? Is it fair that I've given you thousands of dollars over the years, and you've never paid back a cent? Is it fair that you only call when you need something, and you hang up when I can't provide it? David stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't. That's the beauty of being an adult. You get to choose your relationships. But so do I. He headed toward the door, then turned back. You know what, Mom? Maybe Sarah's right. Maybe you are being selfish. The mom I knew would never talk to me like this. The mom you knew was slowly disappearing under the weight of your expectations. I'm trying to save what's left of her. He left without saying goodbye, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the new beauty I'd created for myself, and cried. Not the desperate tears of before, but something cleaner, sadness mixed with relief, grief for the relationship we'd never really had, and hope for the possibility of something better. That night, I called Patricia again. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I just performed surgery on myself without anesthesia. She laughed. The good news is, you'll heal. And when you do, you'll be stronger than before. What if he never speaks to me again? Then you'll know where you stand. And you'll be able to make decisions based on reality instead of hope. It was brutal advice, but it was honest. And I was tired of living in the gap between what I hoped my relationship with David could be and what it actually was. The next few weeks were quiet, but not empty. I threw myself into the process of redesigning not just my apartment, but my entire life. I enrolled in a painting class at the community college. I'd always loved art, but had never had time to pursue it seriously. Now I spent Tuesday evenings learning about color theory and perspective. My hands stained with acrylic paint, my mind focused on creating something beautiful instead of solving someone else's problems. I also started volunteering at a literacy center in Manhattan, helping adult immigrants learn English. It felt good to be useful in a way that was appreciated rather than expected. My students, Maria from Guatemala, Ahmed from Syria, Jin from South Korea, they thanked me for every lesson, brought me small gifts, asked about my family with genuine interest. They reminded me what it felt like to be valued. One evening after class, Maria pulled me aside. Teacher Mary, you seem sad sometimes. Everything okay? I was touched by her concern. This woman who had her own struggles, her own family problems, taking time to worry about me. I'm learning to be okay, I told her. It's harder than I expected. Learning always hard, she said in her careful English. But you, strong woman, I see it. Strong woman. When was the last time someone had described me that way? I'd been called a good mother, a generous mother, a devoted mother. But strong? It felt like a gift. A month after David's visit, he called again. This time, there was no emergency, no request for money. He sounded subdued, different. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said. Oh? Sarah and I have been having some problems, financial stuff. but also other things. She says I take people for granted, that I expect everyone to cater to me the way you always did. I stayed quiet, letting him work through his thoughts. I don't think I ever realized how much you sacrificed for me, he continued. I just thought, I don't know. I thought that's what moms did. I thought you were happy to help. I was happy to help sometimes, I said carefully. But not all the time. And not when it was the only way I could get your attention. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. It was the first genuine apology I'd received from him in years, and it felt like a small miracle. But I'd learned not to let hope override caution. What does trying look like to you, David? I don't know. Maybe we could have dinner sometime? Just to talk? No agenda, no asks, just spending time together? I'd like that. We made plans for the following Sunday. I cooked, but this time I cooked for myself and invited him to join me, rather than cooking for him and hoping he'd show up. It was a subtle difference, but it mattered. When David arrived, he brought flowers, not expensive ones, just a small bouquet from the corner store. But it was the first gift he'd given me in years that wasn't prompted by a special occasion or guilt. These are lovely, I said, and meant it. Dinner was awkward at first. We'd forgotten how to talk to each other without the framework of crisis and solution, but gradually we found our rhythm. David asked about my painting class, seemed genuinely interested when I told him about the landscape I was working on. I asked about his job, listened as he explained a project he was excited about. For brief moments, it felt like we were mother and son rather than ATM and customer. As he was leaving, David paused at the door. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. That night when you said no to helping with the student loan payment, you seemed so sure of yourself, like you'd been planning to say it for a while. Were you? I considered lying, softening the truth to protect his feelings, but we'd spent too many years avoiding difficult honesty. I'd been thinking about it, yes. Not specifically that moment, but I'd been realizing that our relationship wasn't sustainable. Not for me. He nodded slowly. I'm glad you said no. You are? Yeah. It forced me to figure things out myself. And it made me realize that I wasn't being fair to you. I was being lazy, I guess. Emotionally lazy. After he left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, processing what had just happened. It wasn't a complete transformation. One dinner couldn't undo years of problematic dynamics. But it was a beginning, a small crack in the wall we'd built between us, through which some light might eventually shine. The real test came 2 weeks later when David called with what sounded suspiciously like another financial emergency. Sarah had been in a minor car accident. Nothing serious, but their insurance deductible was higher than expected. I'm not asking for help, Mom, he said quickly. I just wanted to let you know what was happening. We're going to figure it out. Maybe take out a small personal loan or sell some stuff. But I thought you should know. It was such a simple thing, being informed rather than being asked to fix. But it felt revolutionary. Is Sarah okay? Are you okay? I asked. We're fine. Stressed about money, but fine. Actually, Sarah wanted me to apologize to you for the things she said before. She's been going to therapy and she's realized that some of her anger about money was really about other stuff. That's very mature of her. Yeah, she's working on herself. We both are. After we hung up, I realized that for the first time in years, I'd had a conversation with my son where I felt like an equal participant rather than a problem solver. He'd shared information, sought emotional support, treated me like someone whose opinion mattered. It was a small step, but it pointed toward a future where we might actually enjoy each other's company. That summer, I did something I'd never done before. I took a vacation. A real vacation, not a long weekend visiting relatives or a quick trip to handle someone else's emergency. I booked a week in Maine, rented a small cottage near the ocean, and spent 7 days doing absolutely nothing productive. I walked on beaches. I read novels. I painted watercolor sketches of lighthouses and seagulls. I ate lobster and ice cream and didn't count calories or worry about the cost. I talked to strangers in coffee shops and learned about their lives without feeling responsible for fixing their problems. Most importantly, I practiced being Mary. Not David's mother, not anyone's solution, just Mary. A woman who liked sunsets and strong coffee and the sound of waves crashing against rocks. When I returned to Queens, I felt different. Not completely healed, that would take time, but hopeful in a way I hadn't been in years. The apartment looked smaller somehow, but also cozier. My paintings from class were hanging on the walls now, adding color and personality to spaces that had felt generic for too long. David called while I was unpacking. Hey, Mom, how was your trip? Wonderful. I saw a bald eagle. Can you believe that? Just sitting on a pier like it owned the place. That's amazing. I've never seen one in the wild. You should visit Maine sometime. You'd love the seafood. Maybe Sarah and I will plan a trip up there next summer. If you want to recommend some places, I'd be happy to. It was such an ordinary conversation, the kind of exchange that happens between families who genuinely like each other. But for us, it felt extraordinary. That fall, David started calling more regularly. Not every week, but often enough that I began to believe his interest in my life was genuine rather than strategic. He asked about my students at the Literacy Center, remembered details about my painting projects, shared stories from his own life that weren't related to crises or needs. Sarah even called once to ask for my Thai curry recipe, mentioning that David had raved about it after smelling it cooking in my apartment. It was a small gesture, but it felt like an olive branch. The holidays that year were different too. Instead of me planning everything and hoping family would show up, David and Sarah suggested we all cook together. We made a mess of my kitchen, burned the gravy, and laughed more than we had in years. Sarah brought wine and actually asked about my opinion on politics, which led to a surprisingly engaging conversation about local elections. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged at my own dinner table. But the real transformation became clear a few months later, when David called with what genuinely was an emergency. He'd been laid off from his job due to company-wide budget cuts. Sarah was pregnant with their first child. They were scared and overwhelmed, and facing the possibility of losing their apartment. "Mom," he said, and I could hear tears in his voice. "I don't know what to do. I've been applying for jobs, but nothing's coming through yet. Sarah's morning sickness is so bad she can barely work. I know you said you wouldn't help us financially anymore, and I respect that, but—" "David," I interrupted gently, "slow down. Tell me what's happening." So he did. He told me about the layoffs, about Sarah's pregnancy symptoms, about their dwindling savings account and mounting bills. But he also told me about the steps they'd already taken, applying for unemployment benefits, researching less expensive apartments, Sarah picking up extra freelance work whenever she felt well enough. They weren't asking me to solve their problems. They were asking for support while they solved the problems themselves. "What do you need from me?" I asked, echoing the question he'd posed months earlier. Honestly, I just needed to tell someone who loves me that I'm scared. I needed to hear that you think we'll figure it out. "Oh, sweetheart, of course you'll figure it out. You're both smart, capable people. This is hard, but it's temporary." "Do you really think so?" "I know so. And David, I'm proud of you for handling this the way you are, for not just expecting someone else to fix it for you. I'm trying to be more responsible, the way you raised me to be." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and realized something profound had shifted. 6 months ago, this conversation would have ended with me offering money and David accepting it gratefully. Today, it ended with me offering emotional support and David accepting it gratefully. The money was beside the point. What mattered was that he'd called because he valued my perspective, not just my bank account. I did end up helping them, but in a different way. I used my connections from the community college to help David network for job opportunities. I researched prenatal resources and shared information about programs for pregnant women. I offered to babysit once the baby arrived, not as a financial service, but as a grandmother who wanted to be involved in her grandchild's life. When David found a new job 3 weeks later, a better job, with higher pay and better benefits, he credited our conversations with helping him approach the interviews with confidence. "You reminded me that I have skills and value," he said. I'd forgotten that. The baby arrived that spring, a daughter they named Emma. When David called from the hospital, his voice shaky with exhaustion and joy, the first thing he said was, "Mom, she's perfect. She has Sarah's eyes and your stubborn chin. Your stubborn chin." He said it like it was a good thing. I visited them in the hospital the next day, bringing flowers and a small gift I'd knitted for the baby, a soft yellow blanket I'd worked on for weeks. When I held Emma for the first time, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Uncomplicated love. This little person would never ask me for money or take me for granted or make me feel invisible. She would love me simply because I was her grandmother, because I was present, because I showed up with my whole heart. But more than that, I realized that David was looking at me differently too. Not as a resource or a safety net, but as Emma's grandmother, as someone whose wisdom and experience had value beyond solving financial problems. He asked me about babies, about child development, about the stories I'd told him when he was small. For the first time in years, my history as his mother felt like an asset rather than a burden. That summer, I made another big decision. I told David and Sarah about my financial situation. Not all of it, but enough to help them understand why I'd been able to live so modestly while maintaining financial stability. "You're rich?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. "I'm comfortable," I said carefully. More comfortable than I let on. Why didn't you tell us? David wanted to know. Because I wanted to know who would love me when they thought I had nothing extra to give. The conversation that followed was long and sometimes difficult. David admitted that he'd assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck, that his requests for money represented real sacrifice on my part. He'd never considered that I might have been choosing to help him, rather than being financially obligated to do so. I thought I was your only option for retirement, he said. I thought that's why you always said yes, because you needed me to take care of you eventually. And I thought you only stayed in contact with me because I was useful, I replied. I thought if I stopped paying, you'd disappear. We were both wrong, but our misconceptions had shaped years of interactions. Now, with honesty as our foundation, we could build something more authentic. I decided to share some of my wealth with them, but in a different way than before. Instead of emergency payments and crisis interventions, I set up a college fund for Emma. I helped them with a down payment for a house. Not because they begged, but because I wanted my granddaughter to grow up in a place they owned, a place I could visit without feeling like an intruder. Most importantly, I started spending money on experiences we could share together. Family vacations where I paid for everyone, not out of obligation, but out of joy. Dinners at restaurants I'd always wanted to try. Theater tickets for shows Sarah had mentioned wanting to see. Money became a tool for connection, rather than a substitute for it. Now, 2 years later, I can say that the hardest decision I ever made, saying no to David's request for help, was also the best decision I ever made. It forced all of us to examine what our relationships were really built on and to choose more consciously how we wanted to move forward. David calls me twice a week now, sometimes more. Not because he needs anything, but because he likes talking to me. He asks about my painting classes, my volunteer work, my opinions on everything from local politics to Emma's sleep schedule. Sarah and I have developed our own friendship, independent of David. She texts me photos of Emma, asks for advice about motherhood, includes me in group chats with her sisters. Emma is walking now, and one of her first words was, Nana, her version of grandma. When I visit, she runs to me with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. She doesn't know about my bank account, or my investment portfolio, or the real estate I own. She only knows that I show up, that I play with her, that I read her books with funny voices and let her help me mix paint colors. She knows that I love her without conditions or expectations. And maybe, through loving Emma this way, I'm learning to love myself the same way. I still live in my Queens apartment, though it's barely recognizable as the same space. The walls are covered with my paintings now, landscapes from my Maine vacation, portraits of my literacy students, abstract pieces that capture feelings I couldn't express with words. The furniture is new but comfortable, chosen for my pleasure rather than my penance. The kitchen has been renovated with granite countertops and modern appliances because I deserve beautiful things and I deserve to enjoy cooking. Most mornings, I wake up excited about the day ahead. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because my life is finally mine. I make decisions based on what I want to do, not what others expect me to do. I spend money on things that bring me joy. Quality groceries, fresh flowers, art supplies, books. I give money to causes I care about, help people I choose to help, say no when I need to preserve my own well-being. I'm not perfect at it yet. Sometimes I catch myself falling into old patterns, offering to solve problems that aren't mine to solve, feeling guilty for prioritizing my own needs. But I'm getting better at recognizing these moments and making conscious choices instead of automatic ones. Last month, a different relative called asking for a loan. My nephew Marcus, who'd heard through family gossip that I was more financially stable than I appeared. His request was reasonable, his situation genuine, his attitude respectful. I could afford to help him without hardship. But I said no anyway, kindly, but firmly. Not because I didn't care about Marcus, but because I wasn't going to return to the role of family bank. I offered to help him research other options instead. Spent time on the phone talking through his situation, connected him with resources that might be useful. He thanked me for my time and advice, never made me feel guilty for not offering money, treated me like a person whose counsel had value beyond her checking account. It felt like growth, his and mine. The most surprising change in my life has been the emergence of new relationships. When you're not constantly focused on one problematic dynamic, you have emotional energy for other connections. I've developed friendships with women in my painting class, with fellow volunteers at the literacy center, with neighbors I'd barely noticed before. These relationships aren't complicated by history or obligation. They're based on mutual interest, shared values, genuine enjoyment of each other's company. They remind me that I'm likable, that I have things to offer beyond money, that people can appreciate my humor and intelligence and kindness without expecting anything in return. Mrs. Rodriguez next door has become especially dear to me. She's a widow, too. Her husband died 5 years ago, and we've bonded over the challenges of redefining ourselves after decades of being defined in relationship to others. We have coffee together most Sunday mornings, take evening walks around the neighborhood, share books and Netflix recommendations. You know what I like about you, Mary? She told me recently. You're not bitter. You could be, after everything you've been through. But you chose to grow instead of shrink. Chose to grow instead of shrink. I'd never thought about it that way, but she was right. I could have let the disappointment with David make me cynical, could have used it as an excuse to withdraw from all relationships, could have built walls instead of boundaries. Instead, I'd chosen to see our problems as information rather than verdicts. Information about what wasn't working, what needed to change, what I wanted my life to look like going forward. That information led me to make different choices, and those choices led to different results. I think about this often when I'm working with my English students. Many of them are starting over in completely new circumstances, learning new skills, adapting to new cultures. They're proof that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, never too late to choose growth over stagnation. Ahmed, the student from Syria, told me last week that he'd finally saved enough money to bring his wife and daughter to America. He's been working 2 jobs for 3 years, living in a tiny studio apartment, sending every extra dollar to help them with visa applications and travel expenses. Teacher Mary, he said, his eyes bright with tears. Next month, I see my family. 3 years I wait for this day. His joy was infectious, but it also made me think about waiting. How much of my life had I spent waiting? Waiting for David to appreciate me, waiting for my sacrifices to be acknowledged, waiting for someone else to make my life feel worthwhile. Ahmed had been waiting too, but his waiting was active. He was working toward something, building toward a goal, making choices every day that brought him closer to what he wanted. My waiting had been passive, hoping things would change without changing anything myself, expecting different results from the same behaviors. The difference was profound. Now I don't wait anymore. If I want something, I figure out how to get it. If a situation isn't working for me, I change it. If a relationship is one-sided, I address it directly instead of hoping the other person will suddenly become more considerate. This doesn't mean I'm selfish or demanding. It means I'm responsible for my own happiness instead of expecting other people to provide it for me. Last week marked the 2nd anniversary of my first no to David. To celebrate, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I bought a small cabin in upstate New York, near a lake where I can paint and read and spend weekends when I need space to think. It's nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a deck with a view of the water. But it's mine, purchased with money I earned through careful investing and patient growth. When I sit on the deck in the morning with my coffee, watching the mist rise off the lake, I feel a peace I never knew was possible. David and Sarah visited the cabin last month, bringing Emma for her first experience with nature. She was fascinated by everything, the way leaves crunched under her feet, the sound of water lapping against the dock, the family of deer that appeared at the edge of the woods one evening. "Nana, look," she kept saying, pointing at trees and rocks and clouds with the wonder that only toddlers possess. "I see, baby," I kept responding. And I did see. I saw all of it, the beauty around us, the joy in her face, the easy way David and Sarah moved through the space I'd created, the possibility of years of similar weekends ahead of us. That night, after Emma was asleep, the 3 of us sat on the deck drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. David told stories about his new job. Sarah shared her thoughts about maybe going back to school. I described the painting I was working on, a sunrise over the lake that I could never quite capture the way I wanted. "You seem really happy, Mom," David said at one point. "Different, but happy." "I am happy," I told him. "Happier than I've been in years. I'm sorry it took me so long to notice that you weren't happy before." "We were both learning," I said. "We didn't know any better until we knew better." He nodded, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the lake, loons calling to each other across the water, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the gentle lap of waves against the shore. It occurred to me then that this was what I'd been looking for all along. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations of love, but simple presence. The quiet pleasure of being with people who enjoyed my company, who were interested in my thoughts, who saw me as a complete person rather than a function. 3 months ago, I made another big change. I started dating. I know. At 65, with a grown son and a granddaughter, it seems almost scandalous. But why shouldn't I want companionship? Why shouldn't I hope for someone to share sunsets with? Someone to discuss books with? Someone to hold my hand in movie theaters? I joined an online dating site for people over 50, And after weeding through some truly bizarre messages, I connected with a man named Robert. He's a retired teacher, a widower like me, with grown children who live across the country. He paints too, watercolors mostly, and we bonded initially over discussions of different brush techniques. We've been seeing each other for 2 months now, taking things slowly, learning each other's rhythms and preferences. He makes me laugh, asks thoughtful questions, remembers details about things I tell him. When we went to the Metropolitan Museum last weekend, he spent as much time looking at my face as he did at the paintings, seeming genuinely interested in my reactions. "You have a very expressive face," he told me over lunch afterward. "I can tell what you're thinking about a piece just by watching your eyes." When was the last time someone had paid that kind of attention to me? When was the last time someone had been curious about my inner life, my reactions, my thoughts? Robert knows about my financial situation. I've learned to be more upfront about things that matter, but it doesn't seem to change how he treats me. He still insists on paying for dinners sometimes, still suggests activities that don't cost money, still seems to value my company for its own sake. David was skeptical when I first mentioned I was seeing someone. "Mom, are you sure about this? How do you know he's not just after your money?" I had to laugh. "David, I spent 30 years wondering if you loved me or just my ability to solve your problems. I think I've gotten pretty good at telling the difference." He had the grace to blush. "Point taken. Besides," I added, "I'm not looking for someone to take care of me or someone for me to take care of. I'm looking for someone to enjoy life with." Sarah was more enthusiastic. "Mary, that's wonderful. You deserve to have someone special in your life." Emma, of course, is fascinated by Nana's friend Robert. She's met him twice now, and both times she's treated him with the same open curiosity she brings to everything new in her world. She asked him about his gray beard, showed him her favorite stuffed animal, insisted he read her a story before bed. Watching Robert with Emma gave me insight into the kind of man he is. Patient, gentle, genuinely interested in her chatter about butterflies and ice cream. He didn't try too hard to win her over, didn't treat her like an obstacle to overcome. He just engaged with her as a person, the same way he engages with me. "She's lovely," he told me after she'd fallen asleep in my lap. "You can see the intelligence in her eyes. She gets that from her father," I said, and realized I meant it as a compliment rather than a neutral observation. Somewhere along the way, I'd started being proud of David again, not for what he could do for me, but for who he'd become as a person. Last month, David called me with news that would have terrified the old version of myself. He and Sarah are considering buying a bigger house, something with a yard where Emma can play and maybe room for a sibling eventually. "We wanted to run it by you first," he said. "Not because we need money from you, but because we want to make sure we stay close enough that you can still be part of Emma's daily life. Part of Emma's daily life. Not close enough that we can still ask for help when we need it, or close enough that you can still babysit when we want to go out. Close enough that I could be part of my granddaughter's daily life." The distinction mattered enormously. "Where are you thinking?" I asked. "Maybe Westchester. There are some good school districts there, and Sarah found a few houses online that we could actually afford with the down payment assistance program." "That sounds wonderful. Have you thought about what kind of neighborhood you want Emma to grow up in?" We talked for an hour about schools and parks and commute times and property taxes. David asked my opinion on different areas, since I'd been researching real estate investments for years. But he also made it clear that they'd done their own homework, made their own budget, thought through their own priorities. I was being consulted, not recruited. When we hung up, I realized that this conversation represented everything I'd hoped our relationship could become. David treating me as someone whose experience and insight had value, while also demonstrating his own competence and independence. Him including me in important decisions, while making it clear that the responsibility for those decisions was his and Sarah's. It was the perfect balance of connection and autonomy, of love and respect. A few weeks later, they found a house, a 1950s colonial in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a big backyard. I drove up to see it with them, walking through empty rooms while Sarah described her vision for each space, and David talked about the projects he wanted to tackle. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked as we stood in what would become Emma's bedroom. "I think it's perfect for your family," I said. "I think Emma will love having space to run around, and I think you and Sarah will enjoy making it your own. Would you want to help us pick out some furniture? Not pay for it," he added quickly. "Just help us choose? Sarah really values your opinion on decorating stuff, and I trust your eye for quality." It was such a simple request, but it made my heart sing. They wanted my input on creating their home, not because they needed me to fund it, but because they thought I had good taste, good judgment, something valuable to contribute beyond money. "I would love that," I told them. The house hunting process gave me a chance to see David and Sarah as adults in a way I never had before. I watched them negotiate with real estate agents, carefully consider mortgage options, make decisions about what they could and couldn't afford. I saw them working as a team, supporting each other through the stress of a major purchase, planning for their family's future with thoughtfulness and care. They were good at being grown-ups. When had that happened? When had David transformed from the young man who called in crisis every month into someone who could handle the biggest financial commitment of his life without asking me to solve anything for him? Maybe he'd always had this capability, and I'd prevented him from developing it by being too ready to step in with solutions. Maybe my well-intentioned help had actually been a hindrance, keeping him dependent when he could have been independent. It was a humbling thought, but also a liberating one. If I'd been part of the problem before, that meant I'd also been part of the solution when I stepped back. My decision to set boundaries hadn't just protected me, it had freed David to become the capable adult he was meant to be. On moving day, I showed up with sandwiches and bottles of water, prepared to be helpful in whatever way they needed. But mostly, I watched. I watched David direct the movers with confidence, watch Sarah organize boxes with military precision, watch their friends pitch in to help without being asked. They had a community. They had resources beyond me. They had built a life that was full and functional and their own. At the end of the day, after the movers had left and the immediate necessities had been unpacked, we ordered pizza and sat on the floor of their new living room eating off paper plates. Emma toddled between boxes, delighted with the novelty of everything being in new places. "We did it," Sarah said, leaning against David's shoulder. "We actually did it." "You did," I agreed. "You should be proud of yourselves." "We couldn't have done it without your help, Mom," David said. "Not the money part, the advice part, the cheerleading part, the believing in us part. The believing in us part." That was exactly what I'd been trying to offer instead of money. Faith in their ability to handle their own lives, confidence in their judgment, support that empowered rather than enabled. As I drove home that night, winding through the familiar streets of Queens, I felt a satisfaction I'd never experienced before. It was the satisfaction of watching people you love succeed on their own terms, of knowing that your contribution to their lives enhanced their strength rather than replacing it. My phone rang as I was pulling into my parking spot. Robert, calling to see how the moving day had gone. "They're wonderful," I told him. "They're really going to be fine." "Of course they are. They're your son and daughter-in-law. Did you expect anything less?" It was such a simple statement, but it revealed something important. Robert expected the people I'd raised and influenced to be competent, capable, admirable. He saw David's success as a reflection of my parenting, rather than as something that happened despite my involvement. When was the last time I'd thought about David's good qualities as connected to my influence rather than separate from it? When had I stopped giving myself credit for the positive things I'd taught him, work ethic, loyalty, perseverance, and started focusing only on the negative patterns we'd fallen into? Maybe part of healing our relationship meant acknowledging that it hadn't been entirely broken to begin with. Maybe there had always been love there, even when it was buried under resentment and expectation. Maybe we just needed to clear away the debris so the good stuff could breathe again. This week, Emma turned 2 years old. For her party, David and Sarah rented a bounce house for the backyard and invited what seemed like half the neighborhood. I brought a cake I'd made myself, chocolate with strawberry frosting, decorated with the kind of elaborate piped flowers I'd learned to make in a cake decorating class I'd taken just for fun. "Nana, pretty cake," Emma announced when she saw it, and my heart melted like it always does when she says my name. The party was chaos in the best possible way. Children running everywhere, parents trying to keep track of whose child was whose, Emma in the center of it all, with chocolate frosting smeared across her face and pure joy in her eyes. I found myself talking with the other grandparents, sharing stories about our grandchildren, comparing notes on the challenges and pleasures of this stage of life. One woman, whose grandson was Emma's age, mentioned that she saw her daughter's family maybe once a month. "You're so lucky," she told me. "It's clear you're really close with David and Sarah. That's not always how it works out." Lucky? Was I lucky? Or had luck been just one factor in a situation I'd also worked hard to improve? I thought about this as I watched David play with Emma in the bounce house, both of them laughing as they tried to stand up on the wobbly surface. I thought about all the conversations we'd had over the past 2 years, all the small choices we'd both made to prioritize our relationship, all the ways we'd learned to see each other more clearly. Luck might have played a role, but so had courage. The courage to say no when yes wasn't working anymore. The courage to have difficult conversations. The courage to admit mistakes and try new approaches. The courage to keep loving each other, even when we didn't like each other very much. As the party was winding down and parents were collecting tired children and leftover cake, Sarah pulled me aside. "Mary, I wanted to thank you for something." "You don't need to thank me for anything." "Yes, I do. You could have made our marriage really difficult. When David and I were having financial problems, when we were fighting about money all the time, it would have been easy for you to take sides or make it worse. Instead, you stepped back and let us figure it out. That probably saved our relationship." I hadn't thought about it that way, but she was right. In the old days, I might have tried to fix their problems by giving them money, which would have eliminated the surface issue while allowing the underlying dysfunction to continue. By refusing to be their safety net, I'd forced them to develop their own conflict resolution skills, their own financial planning abilities, their own interdependence. "I'm glad it worked out," I said. "David's a better husband now, a better father. He had to grow up, and you gave him space to do that." After everyone had left and we'd cleaned up the worst of the party debris, I sat in David and Sarah's new living room holding Emma while she fought sleep. She was exhausted from the excitement of the day, but too wound up to surrender to the nap she desperately needed. "Tell Nan a story," she mumbled against my shoulder. So I did. I told her a story about a little girl who lived in a castle made of cake, who rode a unicorn to school, who could talk to butterflies. It was ridiculous and wonderful, and by the time I got to the part about the butterfly library, Emma was fast asleep. David appeared in the doorway, smiling at the sight of us. "She's completely crashed," he whispered. "Good party," I whispered back. "Great party. Thanks for the cake. It was perfect. Thanks for including me in all of it." He looked puzzled. "Of course we included you. You're her grandmother." "Of course." As if it had never been in question. As if the problems we'd had were so far in the past that they were barely worth remembering. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not dramatic moments of reconciliation, but the gradual return of taking love for granted in the best possible way. I carried that feeling with me as I drove home, as I unlocked my apartment door, as I moved through my evening routine of feeding the cat I'd adopted 6 months ago, a gray tabby named Monet, who'd been abandoned at the animal shelter. My life felt full in a way it never had before. Even during the years when I was constantly busy solving other people's problems, this fullness was different. Quieter, more sustainable, more genuinely satisfying. I had work that mattered, relationships that nourished me, hobbies that brought me joy, financial security that allowed me to be generous without being depleted. I had a son who loved me, a daughter-in-law who respected me, a granddaughter who delighted in my company. I had a man in my life who made me laugh, friends who made me think, students who made me feel useful in the best possible way. Most importantly, I had myself. Not the version of myself I thought others wanted me to be, but the version I actually was when I was free to make my own choices. Tonight, as I finish telling you this story, I'm sitting on the deck of my cabin upstate, watching the sun set over the lake. The sky is painted in shades of pink and gold that would be impossible to capture on canvas, though I'll probably try tomorrow morning when the light is different, but equally beautiful. Robert is coming up for the weekend, and David and Sarah are planning to visit next month with Emma. We'll grill hamburgers and make s'mores and take walks in the woods. Emma will collect rocks and leaves and probably try to feed the ducks despite being told repeatedly that bread is bad for them. It will be ordinary and perfect, exactly the kind of weekend I used to dream about, but never quite managed to create when I was focused on managing crises instead of building joy. Looking back, I can see that my story isn't really about money at all, even though money plays a role in it. It's about learning the difference between being needed and being valued, between supporting people and enabling them, between love that requires sacrifice and love that simply requires presence. It's about discovering that saying no to the wrong things creates space to say yes to the right things. That boundaries aren't walls, they're doorways to healthier relationships. That it's never too late to redesign your life around what actually matters to you rather than what you think is expected of you. Most of all, it's about learning to value yourself enough to require that others value you too. Not because you're perfect or because you don't make mistakes, but because you're a human being worthy of respect and consideration and genuine care. The hardest part wasn't saying no to David's request for money that day 2 years ago. The hardest part was believing that I deserved better than what our relationship had become. The hardest part was trusting that love could survive honesty, that family bonds could grow stronger rather than weaker when tested by truth. But they did survive. We did survive. And what we built together after the old patterns broke down is so much better than what we had before. More honest, more mutual, more genuinely loving. I know my story isn't unique. I know many of you listening have found yourselves in similar situations, wondering if you're being taken for granted, questioning whether your generosity is appreciated or just expected, Feeling invisible in your own relationships. I want you to know that it's never too late to change the dynamic. It's never too late to ask for what you need, to set boundaries that protect your well-being, to require that people earn your continued support through their behavior rather than their promises. It's scary to risk losing relationships that aren't working in hopes of building relationships that do work. But the alternative, staying stuck in patterns that diminish you, is scarier still. You deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for who you are rather than what you can provide. You deserve relationships that energize you rather than drain you. You deserve to feel important to the people you're important to, not just when they need something, but all the time. The money I've accumulated over the years has given me financial freedom, but the boundaries I've learned to set have given me emotional freedom. And between the two, the emotional freedom matters more. Money without self-respect is just a bigger prison. Self-respect without money is still dignity. As I finish this story, the sun has disappeared behind the trees across the lake, leaving only the faintest glow on the horizon. The water is still now, reflecting the first stars of the evening. Somewhere in the distance, a loon calls to its mate, and the sound carries across the water like a song. It's peaceful here. It's mine. I created it, chose it, paid for it with money I earned through patience and planning and believing in my own judgment. But more than that, I enjoy it because I've learned to believe I deserve beautiful things, quiet moments, spaces that exist purely for my pleasure. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine? Have you ever wondered if people love you for yourself or for what you can do for them? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life, taken for granted by the people who matter most to you? If any of this sounds familiar, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters too, and sometimes hearing that we're not alone in our struggles is the first step toward changing them. And if this story has touched you in some way, if it's made you think about your own relationships or your own worth, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. It helps me reach other people who might need to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself, to set boundaries, to require that love be mutual rather than one-sided. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share the hardest and most transformative experience of my life with you. And remember, you are worthy of love that doesn't require you to diminish yourself to receive it. You are worthy of relationships that celebrate who you are, not just what you can provide. You are worthy of choosing yourself when no one else will.